Okay, I'm going live now. Welcome to all those people joining us this evening live on Zoom, on YouTube live. It's fantastic to see you gathering for this very special joint meeting of Cuba Solidarity Campaign and the National Education Union. My name's Gawain Little and I'm chair of the International Committee of the National Education Union. And we're going to be starting in just a few minutes. We're going to give time for people to gather, to get logged in, to get ready, and we're just waiting for one of our panelists to arrive. We've got a fantastic panel for you today. So you've got a minute and a half to maybe quickly go and grab that last minute cup of tea, glass of water before we get started. We'll be getting started in about a minute and a half. Thanks very much for joining us. Okay, I think we will make a start. So thank you to everyone who's joined us this evening for this joint meeting of the Cuba Solidarity Campaign and the National Education Union. We've got a fantastic discussion and fantastic panel for you this evening, which I'm really looking forward to. Just as people are arriving, I'll introduce myself and say a little bit about why we've called this meeting at this time, and then we'll hand over to our panelists. So my name's Gawain Little. I chair the International Committee of the National Education Union. And as a union, we are so proud to work so closely with both the Cuba Solidarity Campaign, but also with our sister union, the SNTECD in Cuba. And that for us is a hugely important relationship because of the inspiration that Cuban educators provide for us and for our struggle for education in this country, and hopefully because of the solidarity and support we provide to each other as we struggle jointly for a better world and for better education for the young people in our care. Now, I'm very pleased to chair this joint meeting this evening, and it is a very timely meeting because it marks 60 years since Cuba achieved full literacy following the success of the Great Literacy Campaign, which we're going to look at in a bit more detail in the second half of our meeting. November 2021 is also the 60th anniversary of the foundation of the Cuban Union of Education, Science and Sports Workers, the SNTECD. And its General Secretary Niurka Gonzalez will be joining us to talk about the achievements of teachers and of education in Cuba over the last 6 decades and of the challenges of teaching under the blockade. Our intention is to aim to finish our meeting this evening by about 7:15. So we're going to take all of our panelists. There may be time for some questions at the end. It's possible. So if you do have a question you would like raised, please do put it in the Q&A box, which you'll find at the bottom of your screen. The meeting's in webinar format, so you'll only be able to see the panelists on the screen. You don't need to worry about your own camera or microphone being on or off. But as I say, if there's time, then we will take some questions at the end. I know that one of the speakers who's going to be joining us today is Daniel Kebede, the National President of the National Education Union, but I'm also aware that because of his busy diary, he may well be coming straight from a national Zoom of the union to this meeting. So before I welcome Daniel as our first live panel member, I'm really, really pleased to introduce Niurka Maria Gonzalez Obera, who is the General Secretary of the SNTECD. Now, unfortunately, because Cuba is blocked from access to Zoom, because one of the many effects of the blockade that not only puts economic pressure on the island, but that attempts to block them from contact, from spreading their political message elsewhere in the world, because they're not allowed access to Zoom. Unfortunately, we're only able to hear Niurka via a recorded message, but I do know that Niurka wishes she was able to be with us live this evening, and likewise we wish we were able to speak live with her, and we will pass on the support and solidarity of this meeting to her and to her union. But I am very, very pleased to introduce as our first speaker today, Niurka Gonzalez from the SNTECD, our sister union in Cuba. Niurka.
Bueno, vamos. Hola, Niurka, es un placer para encontrar contigo aquí en esta reunión pequeño. ¿Puedes explicar un poquito sobre ustedes y tu trabajo del sindicato de profesores en Cuba?
Sí, bueno, un saludo a todos. Niurka González, la secretaria del Sindicato Nacional de los Trabajadores de la Educación, la Ciencia y el Deporte en Cuba. En primer lugar, agradecer la invitación a estar con ustedes acá en esta reunión a la Unión Nacional de Educadores del Reino Unido, para la campaña de solidaridad con Cuba, nuestros amigos de tantos años que tanto nos apoyan. Bueno, nosotros acá en el sindicato ha sido un año de arduo trabajo a pesar de la COVID. Hemos estado inmersos en el trabajo para apoyar a los profesores en las teleclases que se han venido desarrollando de este modo por la televisión para los niños y jóvenes, y también en las universidades. Y bueno, ya ahora estamos abocados de conjunto con la educación general y la educación superior en la preparación del reinicio y el inicio del curso escolar.
Bueno, perfecto. Y este año, el año 2021, es un año muy especial para ustedes, ¿no? ¿Puede explicar por qué es un año muy especial?
Es un año especialísimo porque estamos celebrando el 60 aniversario de la campaña nacional de alfabetización, la cual declaró a Cuba el primer país libre de analfabetismo en América, y también estamos celebrando el 60 aniversario de la constitución de nuestro sindicato. A partir de la campaña nacional de alfabetización, donde muchos jóvenes partieron a los campos cubanos y también a las ciudades a enseñar a leer y a escribir a toda nuestra población, pues Cuba pudo robustecerse de mucha más experiencia, de mucha más enseñanza, y que nuestra población estuviera mucho más preparada. Fue una idea de nuestro invicto comandante en jefe Fidel Castro Ruz, que tuvo mucho éxito y que implicó a todo un pueblo. Precisamente los mismos participantes que estuvieron involucrados en esa gran campaña de alfabetización fueron los que a su vez fundaron nuestro sindicato. El sindicato se funda en noviembre y la campaña culmina en diciembre, el día 22, declarando el día 22 de diciembre el Día del Educador. O sea que estamos muy contentos, llenos de actividades, de muchas acciones para celebrar el 60 aniversario de nuestro sindicato.
Bueno, y felicidades a todos los compañeras y compañeros ahí en este aniversario. Mira, tu sindicato de profesores de Cuba tiene buenas relaciones con sindicatos en toda parte del mundo, ¿no? ¿Puedes decir un poquito sobre tus relaciones con los sindicatos aquí en Reino Unido?
Bueno, nosotros estamos muy contentos y muy agradecidos. Ya data más de 5 años que grupos de profesores y maestros de allá del Reino Unido, de la Unión Nacional de Educación del Reino Unido, visitan a nuestro país, posibilitando que ellos puedan obtener vivencia de la realidad de nuestro país, de la realidad de la educación en Cuba, de cómo viven los cubanos, de las necesidades de los maestros, de las necesidades de los cubanos, y puedan vivenciar el impacto de ese cruel bloqueo que por más de 60 años nos impone el gobierno de los Estados Unidos. Nosotros también hemos podido participar en las conferencias vuestras todos los meses de abril, hace más ya de 5 años. Estamos muy agradecidos, muy ansiosos de que podamos volver a intercambiar esas experiencias. Sabemos que los profesores, los maestros, una vez que regresan al Reino Unido, pues allí pueden exponer todo lo que ven aquí en Cuba y pueden, a través de sus experiencias, pues explicar mejor cuál es el impacto del bloqueo acá en Cuba, que tantas necesidades nos está imponiendo, pero que estamos resistiendo y seguiremos resistiendo.
Perfecto, gracias. Mira, ¿tiene algunos mensajes para la gente aquí en Reino Unido, los sindicalistas aquí? ¿Tiene algunos mensajes para ellos?
Sí, nosotros en primer lugar agradecer inmensamente a la campaña de solidaridad con Cuba, todo su apoyo, toda su colaboración y toda la gestión que ha hecho en aras de la eliminación del bloqueo. Agradecer a la Unión de Educadores del Reino Unido ese intercambio, ese constante apoyo, esa constante colaboración, a Kevin, a todos los que han sido en los años sucesivos presidentes de esa hermana organización, y que por muchos años más nos mantendremos unidos y colaborando e intercambiando experiencias. Muchas gracias también a todos.
Bueno, gracias. Mira, los últimos 18 meses ha sido una época muy difícil para el mundo, ¿no? También para ustedes, yo puedo imaginar ahí en Cuba. ¿Cómo impactar el pandemia del COVID-19? ¿Cómo impactarlo en tu trabajo, el trabajo del sindicato?
Bueno, Cuba no ha estado ajena al impacto de la COVID-19 y bueno, hemos estado preparándonos, hemos estado apoyando a la dirección de los organismos que atendemos, hemos estado apoyando también a la salud pública cubana. Se han establecido centros de aislamientos en escuelas, en universidades, en escuelas pedagógicas para acoger a los enfermos de COVID. Los profesores, los maestros, los estudiantes también han colaborado en el combate contra esta pandemia. Como sabes, nuestros cuadros del sindicato también han estado en esos centros de aislamiento, arriesgando sus vidas, colaborando también en este combate contra la pandemia. Hoy Cuba muestra al mundo 3 vacunas y 2 candidatos vacunales. Hoy Cuba tiene más del 60% de su población inmunizada con 3 ya vacunas puestas nuestras, puede ser Abdala, Soberana Plus. Hoy Cuba ha aplicado más de 24 millones de dosis de vacunas a toda su población. Hoy Cuba es el único y primer país del mundo que tiene una campaña de vacunación con su población infantil de 2 a 18 años. Esto ha propiciado que nosotros podamos reiniciar el curso escolar de forma presencial. O sea que eso es gracias a la ciencia cubana, gracias a la idea maravillosa de nuestro comandante en jefe, a los médicos y a todos los que han colaborado en esos candidatos vacunales. Nos sentimos muy orgullosos de eso y estamos prestos a también poderla propiciar a otros países que la necesiten.
Bueno, perfecto, gracias. ¿Hay algo más que quiere decir, Niurka? Es perfecto para hablar contigo, pero ¿hay algo más que quiere decir?
Una vez más agradecer la colaboración y el apoyo, darle las gracias, que estamos ansiosos de poder intercambiar nuevamente experiencias, que vengan ustedes acá, que puedan visitar nuestras escuelas, nuestros barrios, que puedan visitar el sindicato, que le mandaremos también saludos a ustedes, que trataremos de ir en abril a su conferencia nacional y que seguimos batallando en contra de ese criminal bloqueo que nos impone el gobierno de los Estados Unidos y que esperamos que ustedes nos sigan apoyando como hasta ahora en ese sentido. Un fuerte abrazo y muchísimas gracias.
Y abrazos a ti y todos tus colegas. Gracias, tremendo, Niurka. Gracias.
Okay.
Thank you so much to Niurka for joining our meeting this evening, and such an inspiring description of the role of Cuban educators throughout the pandemic and the way in which the Cuban system, the Cuban society, the Cuban people continue to fight back against this terrible pandemic under the most difficult of circumstances, and yet are already world leading in terms of vaccinations and so many other areas. I think it really is an inspiration. It shows just what can be achieved when a society puts its people first rather than putting profit first. So I think just, yeah, really, really powerful. I'm really pleased that Niurka will hopefully be joining us at the NEU's annual conference next year. So we'll have an opportunity to meet with her in person again and to speak further with her. So fantastic to have Niurka on the call today. And now I'm really, really pleased to welcome our second speaker of the day, the national president of the National Education Union, Daniel Kebede. And I know that Daniel is passionate about all international issues, but passionate in particular about solidarity with Cuba. So Daniel, over to you. You're very, very welcome.
Thank you very much, Gwen, and just brilliant hearing Niurka. I'm really pleased to be addressing this meeting. It's been a tricky year for everyone, so it's great to see people coming together to coordinate action in solidarity with Cuba. I'm immensely proud that our union is affiliated to the Cuba Solidarity Campaign and that we've been able to work together on so many great projects in solidarity with Cuban teachers and students. Now, it's been fantastic seeing Niurka there, but I am really looking forward to meeting her, hopefully in person, at our annual conference next year. And I just do want to say a huge thank you for those very kind words. In fact, you do not have to thank us for our solidarity with you in Cuba at all. Of course, I also just want to take an opportunity to congratulate our colleagues in the Cuban Teachers Union on the 60th anniversary of their founding. It's also an opportunity to celebrate more than 25 years of fraternal relations between our two unions, which has provided our members with the chance to share and learn so much from each other. Teachers in all countries face similar issues, but of course in Cuba, these are amplified in particular through the shortages created by the US blockade. This year is also the 60th anniversary of Cuba's Great Literacy Campaign, and I know Alka will speak more about that later. The Literacy Campaign was one of the first acts of the new revolutionary government, and it really showed the government's commitment to achieving full literacy and providing free education at all levels for all, regardless of ability to pay. And today in Cuba, we can see that when there is political will to do it, education can be a priority. It can be free and universal, and it can be inclusive for all abilities and ages. I'm incredibly proud of our union's work with Cuba, and I am committed to maintaining and building on that, on this. Over the past 5 years, the NEU have sent delegations of UK teachers to visit Cuba and learn firsthand not only about education systems there, but also about the effects of the blockade and the need for solidarity. Each year, our members return home inspired by the example that Cuba demonstrates, and many become increasingly active in our union at home. They speak about the inclusiveness of the education system, the respect that is given to teachers and how their voices are listened to when it comes to shaping the curriculum, and the fact that so many of Cuba's educational leaders are women and are Black. Over the years, we've been involved in many projects of practical solidarity, some of which reach far further than Cuba itself. For example, we have funded training in Britain for language teachers whose job is to teach English to the Cuban doctors and health workers who make up the Cuban medical brigades that provide healthcare to people in low-income English-speaking countries. NEU members have also fundraised and provided over 30 refurbished braille machines for children in the Albu Santa Maria schools for the visually impaired across the island. These machines are US made, and so Cuba is unable to buy them or buy spare parts due to the blockade. It is a small contribution, but we are absolutely pleased to be directly involved in our own blockade busting activities with this campaign. We also worked with the CSC on the Play for Cuba appeal, which sent 8,000 musical instruments to music schools. It was wonderful to see those 2 huge shipping containers from our Liverpool conference go off in 2019, and then see all the pictures and testimonies from the children and teachers in Cuba thanking everyone for their solidarity. I'm really pleased that we are now working on a new project that we will launch in the new year. It will be working across the whole union to fundraise for educational resources for schools to be shipped to the island in 2022. The US blockade affects every area of life in Cuba, but it's particularly cruel to disrupt and affect children's education. By sending some materials for schools and students, such as exercise books, sports equipment, and many things that we take for granted here, we hope to make a contribution to supporting our colleagues in Cuba, and once again showing that we can do something very practical to help break this illegal blockade. So please do watch this space and do get involved when that campaign is launched. But finally, I want to reiterate our commitment to standing with our Cuban brothers and sisters in their struggle against this illegal and cruel US blockade. But thank you once again for this invitation, and just very best wishes for all your efforts over the coming months. Thank you, Gwen.
Thanks so much, Daniel. And I'm proud of the way in which we as a union have stood with our sisters and brothers in Cuba, and I'm proud to see you taking that work forward and leading it on into the future as our national president. So fantastic to have you on the call today. Daniel spoke about the delegations that we've sent over the past 5 years. Over the past 5 years, we've sent over 100 teachers on delegations to Cuba to learn about the education system, to break the blockade with practical material solidarity, but also to become inspired about what a vision of an alternative education system can look like. And I'm really, really pleased that our next speaker is a participant from one of those delegations, Julie Walters Nisbet. Julie was on the 2018 delegation. We published a book, a collection of pieces written by NEU delegates who have been to Cuba. It's available from the Cuba Solidarity website, called Beyond the Blockade, and it tells the stories, the experiences firsthand of the Cuban education system. And Julie's the co-author of a really fantastic bit in this on Black women in leadership in the Cuban education system. So I would urge you to purchase this. But in the meantime, you can hear from Julie herself about her experiences there. I'm really, really pleased to welcome Julie Walters Nisbet, NEU Leicester City President and 2018 Cuba delegation member. Julie, the floor is yours. You're very, very welcome.
Okay, thank you very much, Wayne. Thank you all, and thank you for inviting me to speak tonight. It's exactly 3 years since the delegation, and I've got a short video clip that I'd like to share with members and any people on the Zoom, if we're able to show that from the technical team. You just need to click on the WhatsApp. We can't see it yet, sorry.
No, I think the only visuals we can see is the live meeting.
I think you just needed to go to the next tab along, if I could see correctly. Thank you. We're trying again. Here we go.
And I've got some books for you.
Thank you very much. All right, thank you. And I think that just really summarizes, it's amazing what iPhones can do on its own, Bernard, nothing to do with my audiovisual. And it really summarizes my experiences of the Cuba campaign. So every year I get a little bit nostalgic as we get towards October, and I watched that video. I watched it during lockdown several times to get me through those moments. And I think it can kind of just summarize the experience for me. As an education person, and I've been in teaching now for 21 years, I think it was a truly educational experience. I learned all about the literacy campaign. I was astounded at the SEN provision. And what really resonated with me in the special needs schools was that the physiotherapists, the speech therapists, the visually impaired young people doing geometry with very simple materials, actually. And I have a niece who suffers with cerebral palsy here in the UK and has to travel for miles to get out of school and to go to her physiotherapist, but everything was there on hand. The fact that with such minimal materials, they are able to teach geometry to the visually impaired young people. And the performing arts schools that you saw there, the first school you saw, the primary school, wasn't even a performing arts schools. They were just so happy to have visitors and sharing the joy of receiving the simplest of materials that were donated by our schools: exercise books, pens, pencils, rulers. And just being with those young people truly helped me to remember why I came into education. The free education up to university level, and we saw Bernard there sitting on a panel at the university. I have a niece who's currently studying medicine in Cuba, and as a scientist, I always knew that science was outstanding in Cuba, and the medical doctors as they provide for all of the Caribbean islands, as well as some of the African countries, are very far-reaching in their support for developing countries. The happy, smiling people, and of course, the Caribbean sunshine doesn't hurt either, okay? So that project back in October 2018 was, just one of my greatest experiences as a teacher. I've often talked about it to new young members. As a delegation from Leicester City, we were able to donate our own Braille machine, and you saw Camille London Mayo on there. Don't tell her I put in a video. Camille London Mayo on there handing over the Braille machine. We talked to the young students who were talking about the fact that their GCSEs, were English, math, science, and I think possibly history, not the 25 exams that our young people currently experience on average. And their love for their education, their love for going to school, the pleasure that they took in the most simplest of uniform and meeting visitors and showing us around their schools. Yes. I also learned the geography of Cuba. We traveled to Havana and Pina del Rio. We went along those very long roads, lush and green, often going past a donkey cart or two, but again, showed us the love of education, both in the city and outside of the city. And I felt that there was no difference. Sometimes you can see stark differences in our systems between the provision inner city funding and the way funding is calculated compared to more rural schools, okay? It was great to meet some of our colleagues in the teaching union there, and they welcomed us with open arms. I genuinely felt welcomed, and they really appreciated, you know, the conversations with English, with the people who teach English to the medical students, etc. And last but not least, as we wrote about in the book here from Leicester City, the beautiful Black leadership, okay? We continue to fight for this on a day-to-day in Leicester City. I've just reintroduced the anti-racist charter to my leadership team yesterday, having been sent out over 12 to 18 months ago. And I was just so pleased. You saw the young people there singing Wading in the Water, something that here in the UK we only do in Black History Month and Martin Luther King Day. And it was led by young, experienced, valued Black members of staff that represented the children they were teaching and the staff that they were supporting. It was truly a phenomenal experience, life-changing, I would go so far as to say. And I'm truly grateful for that. I was also one of 10 Black members across the UK to attend. So I think it was the largest Black delegation ever as well. And with that came a range of experiences, people who wanted to help with ICT, people who wanted to get more big books sent out, people who contributed to the music collection at the national conference the following year in Liverpool. And I'm really pleased that we will be sending out more materials because they just make such phenomenal use of those materials, and we're so appreciative. I often remind my students about how appreciative those young people are of their education. And if somebody asked me to summarize Cuba, I would stand by education, education, education.
Thank you, Julie. Thank you so much for talking about that experience. And I was very fortunate to also be on that same delegation in 2018. And yeah, I felt almost a little teary at points during that description, that film. But I think it's one of the things that's so hard to put a handle on, but actually one of the reasons that this kind of solidarity is so important, because it's not just the material. It's the inspiration that we derive from each other. It's the passion. It's the way in which Cuba reaches deep inside of you and inspires you to fight for a better world wherever you are. And I think that's something that's so important in the Cuban example, and maybe one of the reasons why people who are so powerful have tried unsuccessfully to crush that example. And certainly one of the reasons why we're so proud to stand in solidarity and keep that example shining its light throughout the world. And we really, really hope to have our next delegation, which would be due in October 2022. We're really hoping that will be able to go ahead. Our 2021 delegation and 2020 delegation were unable to go ahead because of the pandemic, but we're really hoping to be sending members back out to Cuba in October 2022. So if it's something that you would be interested in doing, finding out more about Cuba, about its education system, and receiving a little bit of that inspiration to bring back and share with others here, then please do get in touch with the International Department, because we take members from right across the country, from a variety of different backgrounds, in order to make sure that experience is shared. So from that, on to the second part of the meeting almost, which is going to focus specifically on the literacy campaign. This is the 60th anniversary of Cuba's battle against illiteracy and becoming the first country in the region to become completely illiterate through what is an absolutely staggering campaign. And I know from many of the delegations we've taken, when people come back, they say that the literacy museum that we visit in Cuba is one of the most inspirational parts of the trip, just because of the sheer mobilization of every section of the population, of every age, from every background, in order to combat illiteracy in Cuba, and how powerful that is. But I'm not going to say any more about it because we've got real experts on the call. So I'm going to introduce this section. We first of all got a short film about the literacy brigade history, and then we'll be handing over to educator, activist and NEU member Alpha Kane, who is also a researcher into the literacy brigade. So we're really, really lucky to have Alpha here on the panel as well. So it'll be over to the film and then straight to Alpha, who will be speaking about the literacy brigades and the battle against illiteracy in Cuba. So.
Éramos 3 compañeras, Aurelia, Hernández, Aide Muñoz y la que les habla, Daisy Beitia. Bueno, yo estudiaba en el preuniversitario y entonces me enteré, hicieron un llamado por la AJR, que empezaba en ese momento, que quien le interesaba ir a alfabetizar a las zonas, a las regiones orientales. Y me anoté en una planilla y me llamaron enseguida. Fui de primer llamado, de los primeros que fueron a alfabetizar, el primer llamado. Trabajar en Manatí. En Manatí, en lo que es el central Argelia Libre. Pero de Manatí, en una colonia cañera grandísima, que había muchas personas que eran analfabetos, bastantes personas. A mí sí sirvió mucho porque me subió o me elevó mucho la autoestima mío personal, ¿no? Que eso es muy importante en la vida.
En ese tiempo tenía 15 años, acababa de cumplir mis 15 años. Mi prima ya era maestra en ese tiempo y sirvió un poco como guía de nosotros, por lo que nos autorizaron a mí y a mi hermana también, aunque era más chiquita que yo, a alfabetizar. Mi papá era sastre, mi mamá modista, que quería haber sido bioquímica. Me gustaban hacer los experimentos, siempre estaba experimentando con pomitos y cosas. Ellos me decían que no podía soñar de esa manera porque ellos no tenían posibilidad de costearme esos estudios. Era mi primera salida de la casa, era mi primera sensación de un tanto de libertad, es decir, lo cual hacía que sintiera una manera de vivir diferente. Y le empecé a coger amor a esa especie de independencia. La ubicación fue en la finca Lespois, en Aguacate, muy cerca de Ramón de las Yaguas, que es ir a una casa, alfabetizar a un señor llamado José María, que no sabía nada, y me llevé esa satisfacción de lograr en un tiempo que él pusiera su nombre, que conociera las letras, que es esa emoción, ¿no?, de ver un logro de un trabajo interesante en poco tiempo. Y estábamos ahí con ese lápiz grande, agarrado, que fue como se desfiló en La Habana, en la Plaza de la Revolución, que desfilamos con un lápiz como mostrando el triunfo de la enseñanza. Y fue un evento de una fuerza enorme, ¿no? Porque éramos tantas mujeres y hombres alfabetizadores, jóvenes, todos, que me quedó, ¿no?, ese recuerdo. Me quedan años y que suceda alguna otra cosa, pero hasta hoy, en mis recientes 58 años cumplidos el 22 de mayo, No tengo otra cosa con una fuerza tan grande como esa y que me evoque a su vez, cuando comienzo a hablar de ella, me evoca para la historia de mi vida las cosas más importantes que he realizado.
Well, thank you very much, Gwen. And I would like to take also this opportunity to congratulate Daniel on your election as a president of the largest union in Western Europe. I'm very proud to see that we have a Black person leading that union. So congratulations, Daniel. This year, we celebrate the 60th anniversary of the literacy campaign. And as Gwen said, we also celebrate the 60th anniversary of the teachers union, the SNTECD. The Cuban literacy campaign had a deep-rooted patriotic tradition. It was more than teaching the illiterate to read and write. It was a process of discovering one's own patria. The goal of the campaign was always greater, said Dr. Raul Ferrer, than to teach poor people how to read and write. The dream was to enable those two portions of the society to find a common bond, a common spirit, a common goal. The peasants discovered the word, the students discovered the poor, and together they all discover their own patria. The target was to foster a culture of mutual learning and understanding between urban and rural people, a symbiosis of purpose, a Cuban identity. One former brigadista, Armando Valdez, said, I quote, "I could never have known that people lived in such condition. I was a child of an educated, comfortable family. Those months, for me, were like the stories I've heard about conversion to a new religion. It was, for me, the dying of an old life and the start of something absolutely new," end of quote. The Lavati Diaz that you're going to hear when I interviewed her in Havana said to me, Alpha, I have to tell you, I learned a lot. I learned how to milk a cow and ride a horse. I went to teach them, but they taught me many things I did not know. I was 15-year-old. I gave them the light of learning, but they taught me how to be a person. I went as an idealistic girl, and I came back as an informed young woman, end of quote. Teaching, when during our discussion, we discussed about teaching. How was it carried out? So teaching was learning. The teacher was not the, inverted comma, narrative subject. And the student was not, inverted comma, the patient listening object. Because, as Paulo Freire said, education is suffering from narration sickness. Thus, Freire described it as a banking concept of education, when education becomes an act of depositing, in which the students are the depositories and the teacher the depositor. And that is from Paulo Freire in The Pedagogy of the Oppressed. The teaching was carried out through a horizontal structure, not a vertical hierarchy. But the literacy campaign had also some antecedents. And if Ryan could put a first slide, I will mention, I don't know whether he's got the slide, but if he hasn't got the slide, I'll read it out. education has featured prominently in the manifestos of Cuban leaders of the wars of independence against Spain. We had Felix Varela, who spoke of popular education and the concept of patriotism. We have José de la Luz y Caballero, who advocated active student learning and critical thinking. He spoke of education as a science. His approach was based on the learner acquiring language, not through repetition, but linked to their own experience, just as a literacy campaign. He became an important influence on José Martí. José Silverio Jorín began to organize Cuba's first mass literacy campaign by proposing that traveling teachers educate children of willing parents in rural areas that had no school. And of course, José Martí, who follows that patriotic concept of education and dedicated and declared that to be educated is the only way to be free. And that quote you can see in many universities, including in La Ciudad Libertad, where the Literacy Campaign Museum is. For José Martí, to know how to read is to know how to walk, and to know how to write is to know how to fly. Because as far as he was concerned, an educated country will always be strong and free. And of course, Fidel Castro. In his alegato, Historia me absolverá, history will absolve me. His courtroom speech after the rebel attack of the Moncada Barrack in 1953, Fidel Castro said a revolutionary government would undertake the integral reform of the education system. And on the 28th of August 1960, he spoke to voluntary teachers and told them, in his speech, the Cuban leader spoke of launching a battle against illiteracy. He mentioned the necessity to create a revolutionary consciousness, the necessity for every single illiterate to undertake or to pledge to learn to read and write, and to mobilize the entire country. When a month later, he addressed the United Nations on the 26th of September 1960, he said, next year, our people propose to launch an all-out offensive against illiteracy with the ambitious goal of teaching every illiterate person to read and write. And then we had voluntary teachers who accepted the call. In January 1961, Conrado Benitez was an 18-year-old volunteer teacher from Matanzas. He was cruelly hanged by a band of mercenaries in Sierra Reunion in the Escambray Mountain in Las Villas, which is now Villa Clara province, in January 1961. In an address to volunteer teachers on the 23rd of January 1961, Fidel Castro said of Conrado, I quote, "He was poor, he was black, and he was a teacher. Here are 3 reasons why the agents of the imperialists murdered him savagely." And when Fidel Castro spoke to the primer Congreso del Partido Comunista, the first Congress of Partido Comunista, 1975, he assessed. Then he told them what happened when we assessed the literacy campaign and what was the problem of literacy in 1959, before 1959. 23.6% of the Cuban population over 10 years old were illiterate in the 50s. There were 600,000 children without school, 10,000 teachers unemployed. And then when the literacy campaign began in 1961, there were a teaching force, volunteer teachers. The 100,000 Conrado Benitez brigadistas, the brigadistas that were named after that Conrado that were murdered by the mercenaries. Young people enthusiastic, energetic, passionate. And it was like a kind of ethical exhilaration to serve their nation. 35,000 teachers, brigadistas, 121,000 alfabetizadores populares, or people's instructors, 15,000 workers, Patria o Muerte, joined the campaign. But during the campaign, what is important to note is that the political context of the campaign in 1961, the military vocabulary that was used by speeches made by Fidel or by the manual used or the cartilla, the primer, all those reflected the political context of the moment. The words such as brigade, battalion, squad, company, commanding officer reflected the reality of Cuba in 1961, a country under siege that needed to defend its revolution against attack from the United States. The whole country was astir with revolutionary fervor. This reflected the word of Paulo Freire that freedom is acquired by conquest, not by gift. The literacy teachers were trained not to approach or to attack, but to attack and conquer illiteracy. The military uniform reminded the brigadistas of the dangers that they faced. The teaching resources also reminding them that there was a causal relation between imperialism and illiteracy. And that you can find in the book that they use. This is the manual, Alphabetizamus, on page 5 on that manual. So 1961 was, unfortunately, in June 1961, the literacy campaign was not on target to meeting the deadline set by Fidel Castro for December. So it was necessary to mobilize the whole country. And how did the mobilization went? The literacy campaign was successful in demonstrating the popularity of the revolution and the ability of the leadership to mobilize the entire population for the greater good. Mobilizing the pueblo was a priority. And even as Richard Fagan put it in his book, The Transformation of Cuban Culture, Coca-Cola advertisement carried a message that read, in 1961, the year of education, use your pause that refreshes to teach reading and writing to whomever you have near. Thousands of cadre from the Federation of Cuban Women, organized volunteers known as the People Teachers, neighbors teaching neighbors, the Young Rebels, the Committee for the Defense of the Revolution, the CDR, which located and persuaded illiterate to be taught. Municipal Education Council were given power to supervise literacy teachers in their town. The accelerated camp put into effect monitor peasants who were not getting as much out of the literacy lesson. Even study coaches, highly experienced teachers, working with the inexperienced brigadistas who were having problems with people resisted. So the campaign was monitored. It was assessed on a regular basis. And when addressing the plenary session of literacy teachers, campaign workers, on the 17th of August, 1961, when it was important to make sure that the campaign succeed, Fidel Castro used words such as mobilizing, duty, honor, supreme and gigantic effort to meet that target. So people were committed. The commitment of the volunteers were total. Despite the counter-revolutionaries' attack, they went on to teach. And as Mati said, they plowed the field in the morning and they taught with the book in the evening to implement the principle of study of work dear to Jose Marti. And the unity. The literacy campaign was a nation-building exercise. It was successful in uniting urban and rural life. It was successful in transforming all those who participated as teachers and students. When the worker and the student met the peasant, they became agents within their local space, which was part of the bigger national space symbolized by the revolution. It was a farmer-worker-student coalition And the great heart of the literacy campaign was the revolution. They were all building a new nation, deeply rooted in their own locality, resolutely devoted to their country's development and open to the world. The literacy campaign, as far as revolutionary consciousness was concerned, was a dialectic process. It was a dialectic process because it was an interaction between theory and practice, an implementation of theory, study, and work. That's the development of the revolutionary consciousness. Literacy was reconceived to be transferable and applicable to all areas of family, community, national, and international life. The traditional literacy approach, which taught those who had a school to attend in isolation from their socio-economic and socio-cultural context, was changed. Pedagogical formulas were developed through revolutionary content that responded to the interests and psychology of illiterate and literacy teachers alike. The brigadistas were making the revolution through revolutionary act. It was successful in desegregating Cuba along gender, race, and class. Cuba became the patria for all its citizens. When I was in Villa Clara, I visited the University Central Mata Abreu de Villas, Las Villas, where Che Guevara received his doctorate degree of honorary degree. Juan, who was a former professor, a retired professor, said to me, talking about the togetherness, the nation, the new nation being built, he said, and I quote, in February 9, 2020, the task of the literacy campaign was the greatest and most unrepeatable of my entire life. It was a process of integration, of solidarity, of humanity, where all Cuban, the entire community, were committed. And then finally, the victory. Before 1959, 23.6% of the population were illiterate. At the end of the campaign, the illiteracy rate was 3.9%. Functional literacy was achieved, 4% being the level required for UNESCO to declare a country free of illiteracy. On the 22nd of December, at the Plaza de la Revolución, Cuba became the first country in the Americas to be free of illiteracy. A total success. Now it is my pleasure to introduce two former brigadistas. One that I interviewed, as I said, Lilavati Diaz, who spoke on the 22nd of December, 1961, at the Plaza de la Revolución, standing next to Fidel Castro and Dorticos, the president, and Armando Hart, the education minister. And another one is an 80-year-old former brigadista from Santiago de Cuba, María Luisa. Thank you.
Hola, buenas tardes. Qué placer poder felicitarlos en primer lugar por este premio que les ha otorgado el Instituto Cubano de Amistad con los Pueblos a esta campaña de solidaridad con Cuba del Reino Unido. Me gustaría hablar con ustedes de dos alumnos míos. El mayor, el de más edad, 70 años, Juan Leiva, de una inteligencia notable, que aprendió enseguida a leer y a escribir. Hola, buenas tardes. Me hacía muchas preguntas de historia, de geografía, de todo. Le interesaba mucho el movimiento de los planetas, las relaciones entre la luna, la tierra, el sol. Y yo tuve que estudiar y emplearme a fondo para poder saciar toda su ansia de conocimiento. Mi otra alumna, la más joven, de los 5 alumnos que tuve, Julia, que le llamábamos la negra, ella me llevaba 2 años. Yo me fui a alfabetizar con 15 años, ahí en la campaña cumplí 16 y Julia tenía 18. Totalmente habíamos vivido vidas diferentes. Yo era una estudiante Y ella con 18 años, una campesina, ya tenía un niño. Aprendió muy rápido. Más que alumna y maestra, nos hicimos amigas. Y tuve la satisfacción, al volver a ese lugar 25 años después, en cuanto Julia se enteró que yo estaba ahí, vino a verme, y cuán fue mi alegría y mi orgullo cuando me dijo que estaba trabajando en la oficina del Policlínico de Puerto Padre. Se siguió superando y trabajaba en la administración de ese policlínico. Eso es un orgullo que teníamos todos los brigadistas, porque en aquella época tú dabas todo lo que tú tenías con la pasión juvenil. El momento de izar la bandera, donde se declaraba Cuba territorio libre de analfabetismo, fue de un júbilo inolvidable, una de las emociones más grandes que hemos sentido en nuestras vidas. Pero el minuto de silencio, donde le rendimos homenajes a los mártires de nuestra campaña de alfabetización, fue impactante. Siempre estaremos en deuda con ellos. Esta foto que les quiero mostrar fue en ese minuto de silencio en la plaza. No se oía ningún ruido, nada. Fue algo muy, muy emocionante. Después yo tuve el honor y el privilegio de ser seleccionada para decir las palabras en nombre de los 100.000 brigadistas Conrado Benito. Realmente para mí siempre ha constituido un gran orgullo haber dicho esas palabras en la plaza, pero le hubiera podido tocar, hubiera podido ser seleccionado cualquiera de los 100.000 brigadistas, porque todos cumplimos bien con nuestra tarea. Yo no estaba nada nerviosa a los 15, 16 años. No te pones nerviosa, estás en la Plaza de la Revolución, 100 y pico mil personas ahí mirándote al lado de Fidel, pero yo no estaba nerviosa, yo lo que estaba era emocionada por ese momento. Fidel se me acercó antes de hablar y me dice, ¿no estás nerviosa? Yo le dije que no. Me dijo, pues mira, yo me pongo nervioso cada vez que voy a hablar. Le digo, ay, yo no lo creo. Yo no le creo, Fidel, yo pienso que eso te lo dice para darme confianza. También se lo dijo a otra brigadista que habló en nombre de las brigadas estudiantiles internacionales, porque con los estudiantes cubanos participaron muchos estudiantes de diferentes países. Si quieren algún otro intercambio, por favor, Alfa sabe cómo localizarnos. Y les sigo deseando muchos éxitos a esa campaña de solidaridad de Cuba con el Reino Unido. Muchas gracias y muchas felicidades a ustedes.
Mi nombre es María Luisa Obera Chavarría. Tengo 80 años y vivo en Santiago de Cuba. Fui una de las compañeras que participó en la campaña de alfabetización convocada por el Estado.
¿Cómo fue su experiencia en la campaña de alfabetización? ¿Cuál fue la razón para incorporarse? ¿Quién la convocó a usted a ir a esa alfabetización?
Bueno, fue una gran experiencia porque, bueno, en esos años no había salido de mi hogar y el Estado convocó a esa campaña para que había muchos campesinos que no sabían leer ni escribir y necesitaban del concurso de nosotros, de la ayuda de nosotros, los alfabetizadores.
¿Cuántos años tenía usted?
En aquel tiempo yo tenía 21 años.
¿Y era la primera vez que usted salía de su casa?
Era la primera vez que yo salía de mi hogar y me iba al campo, yo no conocía la vida campesina.
Y usted allí con los campesinos que usted alfabetizó, ¿cómo fue? ¿Compartió con ellos su vida igual
Fue
que
una
ellos?
vida maravillosa con los campesinos, me acogieron muy bien, yo me acogí muy bien con ellos. Su vida, me acogí a su vida del campo y me olvidé de la vida de la ciudad.
¿Y usted se sintió contenta? ¿Cuál fue el legado que dejó en usted, en su vida, esa participación en esa obra tan grandiosa de la revolución?
Yo me sentí allí en ese lugar muy contenta, fui muy bien acogida, aprendí muchas cosas que fuera del hogar, de la vida de la ciudad, uno no aprende, su vida, sus costumbres, lo que ellos comían, y yo me adapté muy bien a esa vida, ellos me querían muchísimo.
¿Usted cree que eso fue muy importante para nuestro país?
Claro que sí, porque eso ayudó al desarrollo de nuestro país.
Muchas gracias, María Luisa, por esta entrevista, nuestra felicitación por haber participado en esa gran campaña de alfabetización que significó tanto para nuestro país.
Gracias a usted.
Thank you, Alpha, for your contribution and introduction of those videos and for that in-depth presentation of quite everything that literacy campaign meant. As you said, far more than just learning to read and write, and building on all of those kind of those understandings of the true power of education, which goes, as we know, far deeper than what's purely measurable. And again, another way in which I think it challenges the approach to education that is all too common in our society, and challenges it with a fresh set of eyes which sees education as the liberation of human beings. So thank you so much for that contribution and for engaging us in those kind of challenging thoughts and discussions. Really powerful, I think. Before I introduce our final speaker for today, I just wanted to welcome all of those viewers who are watching via YouTube from Cuba, and in particular those who are members of our sister union, the Cuban Educators Union, to welcome them to this discussion and to offer our ongoing solidarity, and looking forward to when we can once again return on delegations, when we can once again have your representatives here to engage in those discussions face to face. But fantastic to be able to make this connection using technology now. So the final speaker that I would like to introduce for today's session will be known to many people, those of you who've been involved in any activity with the union or outside of the union campaigning on Cuba. I'm really pleased to welcome Bernard Regan, who is the National Secretary of the Cuba Solidarity Campaign, and also, in fact, a long-term activist within the National Education Union. So Bernard, you've been one of the people who's been so involved in that connection that our union has made with Cuba, and in joining together what we've just been talking about, the power of education as liberation with the power of solidarity to bring people together across borders. So Bernard, it is so fantastic to have you here today, and I'm hoping that amongst other things that you say, you may give us some practical advice on what people who've been inspired in this call can do to take that work forward. So Bernard, you're very welcome, and the floor is yours.
Thanks very much, Wayne, and thank you for that introduction. And my thanks also to all of the contributors so far, to Niurka, and best wishes to the Teachers Union in Cuba, amongst whom we have many friends. And in fact, during this Zoom, I've had messages from Cuba of people who are unable to watch it, but are hoping they'll be able to catch a recording of it. So I hope there will be a way that they can access this, even if they're not able to experience it live. But our thanks to Niurka for her messages of solidarity and support. My thanks to Julie for her contribution, which, as others have said, made me very nostalgic about our delegation trip, which was in which we forged great friendship amongst ourselves, as well as with the Cubans who we met, and it was a very inspiring event. I've been a teacher, as Gwen suggested, really for many years. 40 years I was teaching in London, and the meeting that we had when the delegation came back, when people talked about their experiences, was generally one of the most interesting, intellectually challenging and emotionally stimulating meetings that I've ever been in, where people were talking about what they had witnessed in Cuba and said quite literally that it made them think about how they were going to change their practice in the classroom. And that was astounding, and for me, really, really moving, because it may seem sentimental, but one of the things that I've said to people on many occasions is that a word we heard not infrequently when people were talking about education was the word love, a word which is virtually absent from the vocabulary of educationalists in Britain and in many other countries, because it was about relationships. It was about the connection between the school, the children, and the community, and that being a whole. As Alpha was describing in the literacy campaign, it was a really unifying experience in which real commitment between people was very evident in what they were doing. And the goals that Cuba set itself on the literacy campaign back in 1961 were very challenging in terms of eradicating illiteracy, which they did within a matter of 18 months. And that commitment to education, as Julie hinted at, has remained absolutely steadfast. Education is completely free in Cuba, right through to postdoctoral level, and people studying at universities have no fees to pay. We visited the university in Pinar del Rio, and we had young teachers with us on that delegation. And one of the questions that came up was, how did they manage to, the education system in Britain? And one of the teachers said that they had literally £50,000 worth of debts, which they had to pay off to pay for their university education in Cuba, in Britain, sorry. And the Cubans who were there were absolutely shocked and just could not believe that education was treated in such a way as a commodity that had to be bought and was not something that was should be there for everyone. And that priority that Cuba puts on education is evident just in one very simple statistic, and that is Cuba spends around about 14% of its GDP on education. In other words, it's a major priority in terms of the government and in terms of what is the commitment in terms of the education field. And the teachers union whom we met in Havana, we asked them and talked to them about their experiences, about how things were managed within the education system. And one of the members of our delegation said to the teachers representative from Cuba, what happens if you don't agree with the government about proposals that they have for education? And this is not an exaggeration. The Cuban teacher didn't understand the question and just couldn't believe that such a question was being asked. And when eventually our interpreter explained it and gave some of the background to the experiences that we have here in Britain, the Cuban teacher just said quite simply, if the government proposed something we didn't agree with, it wouldn't happen. Now, I think that is just an exemplar of the democracy and the unity and the purpose of the teachers' union, but also the respect with which the government treats its teachers and treats its teachers' union in a way which is something very different from our experiences here. So education is very much a priority still within Cuba. But of course, as I've said, Cuba faces challenges with the boycott, which is still very much alive, unfortunately, and live and kicking, even though the United Nations General Assembly voted by 187 votes to 2 to call on the United States to cease the blockade. But that blockade continues, and it also affects not only the trade or potential trade between the United States and Cuba, but also countries like our own, where banks have been fined by the United States government for actually trading with Cuba. And that's an obstacle that we have had with the Cuba Solidarity Campaign, where we've been trying to transfer funds to Cuba, which have been given as a result of an appeal in relation to COVID, in order to assist Cuba to buy necessities to treat people who are suffering from COVID. And that has been a difficulty that we've faced and a challenge that we've faced. Despite the pandemic that has affected Cuba, Cuba has carried out an incredible program of vaccination, with all 11 million people on the island having received at least one vaccination in a program of three injections, which is now rolling out, and 25 million doses have been issued on a 3-stage program, which is very much like what we have now with 3 stages, having produced their own vaccine and roll that out inside Cuba and being prepared to offer it free to other countries in Latin America. That was acknowledged by an article which appeared in April of this year in The Lancet, the highly reputable British medical journal, commenting on how important and how successful that was. So Cuba is dealing with very many challenges at this point in time, but continues to see education as a priority. Children in Cuba, many have been away from school because of the pandemic. They've been using, as far as they can, the television in particular, and online facilities. At the moment, the last years in the primary, secondary, and pre-university schools have been in schools physically. But from November the 15th, I'm pleased to say that all children in Cuba will be returning back to school. That was a message I got from friends in Cuba today. So things are developing and things are changing. We in the Cuba Solidarity Campaign think it's very important to build a campaign in Britain against the blockade, to call on our government, not just as they have done, to vote at the United Nations General Assembly against the blockade, but to put those votes into action by giving solidarity and practical support to Cuba and facilitating trade between Britain and Cuba and opposing the blockade, as indeed the president of Mexico said recently, saying that it was not enough for people to vote against the blockade, they had to do something about it. And Mexico has sent ships to Cuba with goods and resources to help break that blockade. I'm pleased to say that the tourism industry in Cuba is beginning to revive. It went through obviously a really difficult time with COVID, and obviously Cuba lost a lot of income because of that, and that was a serious setback. So I hope that we from the National Education Union will be able to help rectify that by sending a delegation in the near future and being participants within that. It's important for us to keep up the pressure, to keep an eye on what the British government is doing, to lobby our members of parliament to get that message across widely within the union, within our own union, with our own districts, but also within other unions through trades councils and other media that we have contact with. And I hope that people will take that up and pursue that. We want you particularly to affiliate to the Cuba Solidarity Campaign. So if your district is not affiliated, please give that consideration. And we're happy to provide speakers to come along to talk about Cuba and what is happening with the blockade, and to do that. And also to keep in touch through the Cuba updates that we have that will keep you informed about developments that are taking place and how things are unfolding and how Cuba is responding to the challenges that we have. And I hope that everyone will feel able to do that. And lastly, just to give a plug for the Latin American conference, which is taking place on the 4th of December. And I hope Julie and Alpha and Gwen and Daniel that we'll be able to meet up there, and other people who've been on the delegations will also be able to meet up so we can enjoy a drink, maybe even a Cuban rum, and celebrate those delegations and reminisce, but also think about how we can collectively plan for the future to develop the campaign on Cuba. Daniel mentioned the possibility of another initiative by the union, and I won't go into that because I don't know any details, and I know it's not yet formally being rolled out, but I know that it is something that I hope everybody will get involved in when that actually begins. So solidarity to everybody here. A big thank you to the National Education Union for the role it has played in solidarity with Cuba. in developing that and encouraging people within the Union to engage with Cuba. And one of the things, just I'll conclude on, that if people come on the delegation, I just want to say to people that it's the NEU's delegation. So everybody on those delegations participates and has a chance to ask any questions they like. There are no questions that are off limits or are not permitted. It's an event for really exploring and getting a chance to see what the real Cuba is like. And obviously, one hopes to come back and engage in continuing and furthering more solidarity work with Cuba. Thank you very much to everybody who's participated. Thank you to the NEU. Thank you.
Thank you, Bernard, and thank you so much to all of our speakers today. I'm absolutely sure that everybody here has enjoyed this evening as much as I have and has learned as much as I have from this fantastic panel. Thank you to all of the audience who've joined us both in Britain, in Cuba and elsewhere. It is fantastic to have you with us. And if you want to find out more, do go onto the Cuba Solidarity website and buy a copy of the book. Do put yourself forward for a future NEU delegation. Most importantly, make sure that you are a member of the Cuba Solidarity Campaign, that your local union branch or district is affiliated and is involved, and together let's keep fighting to break the blockade and to stand in solidarity with the Cuban people. They are a shining light inspiring us right across the world, and we must never let that light go out. We know they won't let that light go out, but we must stand with them in that. So solidarity with Cuba. Thank you for joining us this evening, and I hope to see you all again. Bye-bye.